Welcome to the Honest Dog Breeder Podcast with me, your host, Julie Swan, where each week we dive in to discuss all things dog breeding so you can build a breeding business you love, producing dogs that fulfill their owners' dreams. I believe you can have an honest dog breeding program that also pays the bills. So throw those pods in your ears while you're cleaning kennels. I'd love to join you. You guys are in for a treat today. Today we have Jessica Johnson of Jessica E. Johnson PLLC. Jessica, thanks so much for coming on today. And can you tell us a little bit about you, who you are, and what you do?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and to chat with you about today's topics and talk about breeding and guardianship agreements. But
Fun thing.
I'm up in Washington State, and I have my own practice and have since 2018, and I focus on equine and canine law. And my practice focuses a lot on what I consider to be the risk mitigation side of the horse and dog worlds. And so I help people decide whether or not they should form a business, help structure contracts for all aspects of those industries. And then I also do some litigation and so forth when disputes go bad. But I don't just exclusively help the business owner side. I help owners, professionals, and businesses alike, and just try to be on the right side of the line and feel good about who I'm helping.
Yeah, I think that's what struck me so much about you the first time we talked is like I just feel like you get it. It's so refreshing. It's somebody who like can look at the situation between the owners, the breeders, the dogs, and really try to see what's the right answer for the whole situation. I felt like I remember you were like, look, if they didn't do it, if they were being really mean, I don't need to take them as a client. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah,
You can choose.
absolutely. I mean, I started all of this because I saw a void in the legal world of attorneys that had the knowledge to even know how to help people in the horse and dog worlds because they are such unique industries. And
Yeah.
so that's kind of where I stepped in. And then as my practice has grown, I've been able to be a little bit more screen potential clients a little bit more and make sure
Sure.
that the clients that I'm working with are a good fit. And screening is also something that I counsel a lot of my own clients on in terms of
Screening buyers. Yes.
screening buyers and the people that my clients engage
Yeah.
in business with.
Is it pretty easy for you to tell right away, like when somebody comes in and they start pitching their story and you're gonna be like, you were not being very honorable when you wrote this agreement, or can you tell that right away with people?
Sometimes, and I think one of the strongest indicators is our gut. And I've really learned to trust my gut. And I have found that when I didn't through the years, that oftentimes I wished I had in hindsight. And so when for whatever reason my gut just speaks up and is like, no, don't take this case, or speaks up in some capacity, I really do try to listen to that and not just mind over matter and rationalize it and proceed anyways, because a lot of times I wish I hadn't. And I think that that's a lesson that just it's just a skill. It's something that you develop over time the longer you do
Yeah.
business, but it's a skill that anyone who does business has to develop because you can avoid a lot of disputes if you take the time to just
Get
do
the right
business with
client.
good people.
Exactly. I think every breeder, been doing this a while. You're like, we all have somebody we regret selling a dog to. It's very, it's hard to pass. So that's great. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got into this? Because it is kind of unique, right? Like you said it wasn't really addressed in the world and that it was a, pocket of law that was needing service. But
Yeah. Well, I guess I'll go back to my childhood a little bit. My mom
Mhm.
is an obedience trainer. She has taught dog training classes since I was a baby, positive reinforcement dog training classes, and she's typically done her classes through one of the school districts here. And so she does like a puppy class and a beginner class, and she's done some intermediate stuff. And she's always been involved in the dog world as well. She has rough collies, has done some breeding, not a whole lot through the years, but is certainly very involved in that world in her own circles. And she is very active in AKC confirmation shows and sometimes the obedience ring. And so I grew up around all the dog stuff and had a love for animals from a very young age. And then around 8 years old, my mom had a good friend of hers that she knew through dogs, but often the worlds uh, blend and you've got dogs and horses and they end up mixing at one point. And so she had a good friend who was also deeply in the horse world and jumped and did all that kind of stuff. And so we used to help watch her property when she went out of town. And so she told my mom, instead of paying you to watch, why doesn't my husband, who's a horse trainer, give your daughter a few riding lessons?
That's cool.
And you don't give a horse crazy 8-year-old some riding lessons and expect them to be like, well, that was fun. I think I'll just go back to whatever else I was doing before horses came into my life. So I started riding at 8 and got my first pony and then was just completely in that world and never looked back. And so when I was finishing up undergrad, I went to the University of Washington and started becoming interested in law and thought, well, geez, horses are expensive and dogs are expensive. So I guess I need to have a good career so I can afford these hobbies. So I went to law school and then I started practicing and there was one point within a few years of practicing that I was at the office for, I don't know, it must have been third, fourth day that week. It's dark outside. It's well after 5. I'm heading home. I've got a 45-minute drive to get home. And now it's too late to ride. It's too late to really mess around with my horses. I'm tired. And I just hit this wall a little bit where I'm so newly into my career, but yet I'm already unhappy because I pursued this career in order to continue doing something that I love, but I don't have time to do it. And so I felt stuck. And then I started taking a couple of equine related cases and I loved it. I was energized. I was motivated. I was passionate about the case and kind of refocused. And so I was licensed in 2013, worked in a few different offices. And then in 2018, I hung my own shingle because I decided that if I wanted to have the work-life balance that I wanted in terms of continuing to have a career, but also continuing to ride and show and be involved in the dog world as well, and to do all these things that I needed to make it happen and create a lifestyle that afforded that, and not just financially, but just structurally. And so I opened my practice and I did it in a cloud-based manner so that I can work anywhere from if I have internet. And then I can take my laptop and sometimes I work late, whatever. I've kind of adapted my practice to fit my lifestyle, and the clients that I work with are similarly minded. And so it's great because then they understand. Like if I have a horse show or I'm heading to a dog show or I'm doing something or I have a vet appointment, I don't get pushback. Like, why aren't you in the office from 9 to 5? So to circle back to the original question, I just realized that I wasn't enjoying what I was doing. I wasn't doing my hobby, which was kind of the whole point. And I saw a need. I saw people who needed somebody who understood the dogs and the horse worlds and stuff. And so that's when I decided to hang my own shingle and focus on this. And it's a lot of work owning your own business, any business, but it's extremely rewarding. And I'm very grateful for this journey and the people that I've been able to meet along the way and the people that I've been able to help. And it's been a very rewarding journey so far.
Yeah. Oh, it's so good. So good. Do you feel like that relief, like when you see the light bulb come on and someone you explain something and then it just clicks for them and you're like, we just saved you a big problem. And like that's gotta be
Yes.
so nice. Yeah.
When I talk to people and they say things like, "Oh, I'm so glad that I contacted you," or "I feel so much better having talked to you," or "Oh my gosh, I didn't even think about that." And all those types of things of helping people think about things that they didn't think about. I mean, there's no way that we can anticipate everything, but there's a lot of empowerment from protecting yourself on the front end and going into a transaction or beginning a business knowing that you've done everything you can to protect yourself and to set
Yeah.
yourself up for success and not have this fear of dispute because you didn't and you cut
Oh,
corners.
I totally agree with you. I feel like so many times, like, I think like the most dangerous thing that I hear sometimes is people are like, well, we'll just figure it out later. No, no,
No.
don't do that. Think about it now. It'd be so much better to talk about it now before anything's happened.
Yes.
And yeah, but I agree with you, like in your field and with your education and everything and then of course your background with the animals like you can see where things could happen and anticipate them in ways and legal things that we just wouldn't even go to think about because we just don't know how the law is written. I think it's just
Yes.
invaluable. Yeah, absolutely.
These industries many, many years ago, and even today to some extent, have always been sort of handshake industries. And
Yeah.
so people, but I always say that the value of a handshake is not what it used to be. And if you engage in business long enough, whether it's just kind of a side hustle or it's your main
Yeah.
shtick, whatever, you do it long enough and you're going to encounter a dispute and maybe you're able to resolve it or maybe it turns into a massive lawsuit. And so, given that the value of a handshake isn't what it used to be, it really is important to memorialize things and get them in writing. But then it doesn't end there because sometimes if you, just by getting it into writing and getting a written contract, if it's really poorly drafted, it doesn't get you much farther. And I often see that people are, if they do put things into writing, they're mediocre about talking about what everybody's going to do, but they completely avoid any terms and conditions that address scenarios that go wrong or what happens if it
That
goes
makes
wrong or it
sense.
doesn't work or somebody doesn't do this or
Yeah.
the dog shouldn't be bred or whatever. All the ways that things can go wrong are not addressed. And so then when there is a dispute, the contract doesn't do anything to help pick up the pieces and resolve things.
Yeah, and that makes so much sense. I think I see that all the time. It's like I have a weird clause in my contract where if what happens if they've paid for the dog in full, but they don't come and get it? You're under contract. It's their dog. They paid for it. At what point in time can you resell it if they're never going to come and get it? And it sounds so weird, but I've met breeders that it's happened to. So, it's a higher probability on like livestock guardians where people are like, can't you just train them a little longer for me? I'll pick them up later, and it's like, ah. But anyway, so yeah, so then you have to put a consequence. So I'm like, well, if you haven't coordinated with me, then, by this time, then this dog's mine. You've surrendered your money and I can resell it. But like how weird, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes you don't know that something needs to be a contract term until you
Totally.
encounter it. And I live vicariously through my clients from things like that. That I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
I guess I need to incorporate some language in there. And it's
Right. Yeah.
also at the point that it's not just a one and done contract once you have it drafted, that it periodically needs to be updated or adjusted. And as you use it and you learn, oh, well, actually, what if this happens? You need to add a sentence to your contract here and there, or a couple words or something. So revisiting that contract over the course
Mhm.
of time is important
Yeah.
too.
Do you think of any like triggers other than like an incident happening? Is that something people should review on a routine basis? Just like by after so many months or once a year?
It probably depends on the individual, the scale of their business,
Mhm.
and all of that, and how often they're breeding, whether it's a hobby or a full time thing. But I'd say that for starters,
Yeah.
know what's in your contract in the first place. I
Okay.
think a
Tell
lot
me
of
a little
times
bit more. Yeah, what happens?
I'm just I'm just saying that I think there's a lot of instances where people will have a contract and they're like, "Well, great, I've got a contract," and they don't actually even have a great understanding of what their contract says. And they actually operate their business in a way that is not aligned with what the actual contract says.
Yeah.
So, but in terms of revisiting it, I generally think that basic rule, probably at least annually take a look at your contract and make sure that it's still consistent with what you're doing, because business is constantly evolving, and if that results in a change to your agreement, then
Yeah.
it's a good time to do that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that makes sense. And yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I know I've seen contracts where people have like grabbed it from here and here and they've like pasted it together. Oh, I need that clause. And they paste it in there. And then like the fonts aren't even the same sometimes. That's a
Or
hard.
it's just like, see paragraph such and such, and that paragraph doesn't exist.
Yep, exactly. What does that look like in court when you're working with that, or even if just getting presented? Are you just like, oh, we're gonna be okay if that's the contract you're working against?
I mean, a lot of those things are very, very fact specific, because it's going to be based on the particular contract and that particular state's laws.
Sure.
But generally, the courts are going to enforce the contract to the extent that they can. And I'd say that there's a lot of bad contracts that get filed in court. So it's not
Okay.
uncommon for poorly drafted contracts to end up in court. And here's the thing: if it was well drafted, the dispute may have been avoided because the contract may have addressed it squarely enough that it didn't make sense for there to be a lawsuit. A contract can still squarely address a dispute and result in a lawsuit, but a lot of times a well drafted contract is clear enough that there isn't really much of a dispute about what happens if.
It's more like so there's a this happens, then this is the consequence, and somebody's
Mhm.
fighting that, but the contract clearly states that that's what's supposed to happen. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, and if the contract is clear, then there isn't really much of a need for litigation. But if the contract says the breeder may retain possession of the dog while attempting to be bred within the breeder's reasonable discretion, or the word
Got it.
reasonable is used or something like that, and now we have to interpret, well, what did reasonable need mean under these facts and
Yeah.
circumstances? Or a vague contract where a term or thing is not addressed. And so then you can't just look at the contract and determine what the plain meaning of that clause or word or phrase is. There has to be litigation over it because there's two very plausible interpretations. So it's like the
Got it.
vague contracts that will end up in court a lot of times because there's two very legitimate arguments over what something meant. But the ones that are pretty clear about what happens are more likely to avoid the lawsuit
That makes sense.
entirely and
So you're saying a lot
resolve
of
it.
lawsuits are simply because there wasn't a clear way to handle a situation, and so there's an interpretation difference, and so then you're sort of fighting over that interpretation ultimately.
Yes. Yeah.
I've never really thought of it
Interpreting
that
a
way.
contract or something in
Hmm.
it is a big part of
What your
legal
job is
disputes.
there. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That makes so much sense. All right, so give us the juicy part. We have where, okay, I'm not trying to scare breeders, guys. I'm not trying to be a pain, but I do want to share some things that happen and things you should be aware of. So, can you tell us some horror stories?
I always, when people come to me and they will say, well, I'm not worried about the other person. They've been my good friend. We went to high school together or something like that. I'm
Yeah.
always like, yeah, because I see the dark underbelly, and I do still
Yeah.
believe that most people are good. Most people are trying to do the right thing, but we do have some rotten apples in the dog and horse worlds. And then sometimes people just have disputes and they just disagree. So let's see here. What would be some good examples?
Yeah, just when a contract has gone wrong.
Well, I've got a couple we could talk about that would be an example of how things can go wrong in the absence of a written contract.
Oh, yeah, share that. Because
So,
it's still a contract gone wrong.
yeah. So we'll talk about these in a more general sense because I don't want to violate any kind of attorney-client
Absolutely.
privilege or anything. But so we'll kind of talk about these scenarios in general. One that comes to mind involved a dogs that were bred originally for work with like military PTSD and so forth. She
More of like a
was
service dog
they were
capacity.
she was breeding service dogs and emotional support dogs primarily for service members to deal
Mhm.
with service
Yeah.
related PTSD and stuff like that. And in this particular scenario, the who was ultimately a plaintiff and my client went to high school with the mom. My client and mom were close friends, and the daughter is the one who was breeding these dogs. So
Okay.
my client and her family had known these people for years. She went to high school with the mom, then they had their own kids, and the families continued to be friends. And now they're at a point in life where their kids are adults and breeding and doing their own things in life and stuff. And so she was very close with the family and all of the kids. And with that, you want to support your friends, you want to support their businesses, you want to support their success. And so she ended up taking two of these dogs into the home. And there was some discussion about it, but my client was very clear that she said, because she did a lot of guardianships,
The
and
breeder did a lot of
the
guardian.
breeder did a lot of guardianships. And
Okay.
so she was very clear to her, and she said, listen, if we're going to do this, I want to own the dog. Like, it's my dog, and you're welcome to breed, you're welcome to do this, I want to support your business and everything else, but it's going to be our dog.
Hmm.
And that was agreed to. But of course, there was no written contract between these people because they were good friends.
Yeah.
And so there were agreements that she would do some training with these dogs and, get them CGC trained and do some of this work, and that they would be bred if they were good candidates to continue on the temperaments and so forth that she was looking for these
Okay.
service dogs. And there were disputes, there were just disagreements. It just got ugly. And the breeder took possession of the dogs in order to attend some veterinary appointments related to breeding.
Okay.
And then said, nope, you can't have them back. And just refused to return them. And one of them she wanted to breed, and one of them she didn't want to breed. The one that she didn't want to breed, she gave away to somebody else and said, don't take it to the vet right away. If you could just, this dog, it's not being sold with papers. It just, the last home wasn't a good fit and everything else. And so she takes this dog without papers and is told not to go to the vet right away. And then my clients post on the internet, come to find out they attended the same church. And so they got one of the dogs back because she was able to get
Explain
into
the
direct
situation.
communication with this
Oh,
person and learn exactly what she was told. Like, the breeder just tried to get rid of the dog to somebody else, which was absolutely
it's just
insane.
wild. Hmm.
And then we had to file a lawsuit in order to get possession back of the other one. And so then one of the biggest issues in an ownership possession dispute has to do with, well, who is the owner? Because the
Oh,
owner is the one who's ultimately entitled to possession. And we don't have a contract that's going to delineate when and how and everybody who gets possession and everything. We still have to establish ownership, let alone possessory rights. And there
yeah.
was no contract. And so at that point, it often becomes very factually based. It becomes who paid for this, what were the agreements, what were the understandings, what was in writing, what was discussed in text or email or this or that. And that gets expensive too, putting on all that evidence. Ultimately, there were some text messages where they were talking about what the guardianship arrangement looked like, and the breeder in casual conversation said, yeah, I mean, it's your dog, except that, and described the breeding things, and then said at the end, we'll spay and this and that. But we were able to get that dog back from the breeder successfully through court order based on text messages, thankfully, where the breeder affirmed that or described what she believed to be a guardianship, because during the lawsuit, she was trying to say the dog was still hers and they were just a guardian home. They were not an owner, they were just a guardian home. And so it's my dog. I get to keep the dog if I want to. I get to make the decisions about breeding and possession and all of this. And thankfully for that text message, it was our lifeline in terms of asserting the rights for this family who just wanted a good, they just wanted their family dog to love.
Yeah. The
and
breeder referred to basically giving them described full ownership in the text messages, essentially.
Yeah. So one of the biggest issues, and I think that this is an important one, the reason I brought this example up is that, for one, getting a contract in writing. I mean, that's simple, that's low hanging fruit. But just the other two things that just really resonated as takeaways from this example, it's just how it doesn't matter whether you're friends. It doesn't matter how much history you have, family. It doesn't matter whether last year they were over for Thanksgiving. It doesn't matter, because honestly, sometimes the people that you're the closest with are the most volatile disputes when things go bad, because you're close and because your emotions are so deeply connected to the situation and the people involved and all of that. And so,
Sure.
like, there's the old saying that you can't truly hate somebody unless you've loved them. Have you ever heard that saying?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, it's almost the same thing. It's like the closer you were, the worse things can.
Well, I mean, look at divorce court. Yes. I mean, it's every day, right?
So there's that one is a big takeaway. But then also is what is the meaning of guardian? What is the meaning of the guardian home? Because I think there's a little bit of this industry expectation standard that guardian home is breeder is the owner, and the owner is not actually an owner until the dog is done being bred or shown or whatever the terms are.
That's
and
standard,
is spayed or neutered. Then they're the owner. They get their ownership rights then. But that's not always the case. And the contract is an opportunity to define what is a guardian, who is the owner, when does that transfer, how does it happen, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. I think so. Just delineating who's responsible for what is often missing in so many of the contracts that I see. Yeah, it's brutal.
And this was just one of those things where if there had been a contract, the parties could have laid out their separate interests, could have been represented. For my clients, they just wanted family dogs. They wanted loving companions for their children, for their family. And they just thought it was cool to support their friend's breeding program. They thought the program was cool because they're helping service members deal with PTSD. And, you want to see your friends succeed. But the breeder didn't have those human feely goals as much. She was more concerned about the breeding goals and stuff. And then you entered into this arrangement, and it's like doing business with friends, I guess, is one of those scenarios.
It can be really good or really bad, but having a good contract, I think, is what prevents so many problems when the expectations are clear, 100%. And I also feel like a lot of times breeders, we make the mistake of putting too much into guardian homes. I think sometimes if your whole program's in guardian homes and you haven't, like, if you're going to put one female and you absolutely have to have her and she's a critical piece for your bloodlines, she probably should be in your home. Like, just keep her at your house,
Yes.
If you have only one stud, it should probably be at your house. If you have like 4 and you want to put them in guardians, okay, right? Because you have backups. But when you put all of it, it adds so much emotional weight to that relationship. And I think that's the hardest part. The best contracts I see for guardians, the breeder can walk away from the relationship if something goes wrong. It's not written that way, but I would love for a breeder to go in and say, if I lose this, it's not going to capsize my breeding program, because it's too much on the line. It's too much pressure. Yeah.
Value, very, very powerful concepts, because when people engage in business, it needs to be a good fit. And I think that when you're looking at these arrangements from the breeder's perspective, you need to find guardian homes that are truly aligned with your goals, that are truly, that you're on the same page and that everybody's expectations are front and center. And, nobody's hiding the fact that they really want a family dog while this person really wants this breeding dog. Like maybe they're both in the dog worlds a little bit, and in a way that they share those goals and those interests and stuff. And I think a lot of times guardian homes will come into it if they don't have a clear understanding and think it's cool. Oh, my dog's going to be bred. Oh, my dog's going to be shown and could be a champion. Oh my gosh, all this stuff is so cool. Or they could have these titles, or they could have this or that, but they don't understand the practical day-to-day impact of that shared arrangement. And I think that there are instances where a breeder does have that foresight while the other party doesn't. And
Right.
so it's a good opportunity for the breeder to just be transparent about their goals for the home, and choose like-minded people, and also be prepared to cut their losses, like you said, and let a dog go if it's not working, and not put the most prized female into a guardian home, or your most prized
Yeah.
dog into a guardian home.
Yeah, exactly. Anything that's a critical point of failure, you need to have a little bit more control of. I agree
Yes.
with you. I also think too, a lot of times breeders they forget to give the guardian a benefit. And I think, I don't know, to me, it's a red flag. I know this is very common, so, piss some people off. But there's this idea that guardians, they get a free dog in exchange for doing the guardianship. And the problem I see with that is that you get a bunch of people who think they can get a free dog.
Yeah.
And it just drives me crazy because those are not the people. Like you were just talking about these great clients who are excited their dog could be a champion, or excited to be a part of the breeding program, or excited that their dog was the best one in the litter and was selected for this. You know, those are the kind of people who are in a way somewhat interested in the outcome of the offspring, and
Mhm.
if that's not really in the cards, like my German short hair people, they're kind of like, I could take or leave that part of it, but I'll help you, Julie.
Yeah.
And for them, I I have them pay for the dog as a pet, but then I pay them per puppy. So I give
Yeah.
them a little cut to give them an incentive to be a part of it you know
Yeah.
but I mean, and I love like deposit ideas where they pay but they get so much of it back for every litter or something along those lines, just so that they need a benefit because it's a pain in the butt sometimes to be a guardian.
Yeah.
So they need a benefit out of it, but also we can't just give away free dogs and because they don't have any skin in the game, and that feels like a bad one.
Yeah, there's very real concerns, interests on both sides of the transaction, and it's important to account for both of them, all of them on both
Yeah,
sides.
I agree.
In the choosing the guardian home thing, it reminds in the breeding side of it. Another example comes to mind of a case that I had
Sure.
a long time ago. This was a purebred dog, and the daughter was interested in doing some junior handling and getting some introduction into the breed ring. And she was going to do 4-H. She was going to do doggy 4-H with the dog. And, I don't know whether she was going to I think she was going to do junior handling and she was going to do some obedience.
Okay.
And the breeder was motivated to mentor her, take her to the shows with her, let her help groom, show her the ropes and help her and
Yeah.
help her gain all these different experiences. And they had no written contract, but there was a tentative agreement that if the dog finished her championship, that they would breed the dog, and that the dog would have only one litter, would stay
Mhm.
with the breeder during that time, and then they would either get one puppy, the guardian home owners would either get one puppy back from that litter or the value of one puppy.
Okay.
But there was no actual written agreement, but that was sort of the understanding. And then, to all of the listeners who have shown in confirmation, they know that sometimes dogs can finish really fast and then sometimes they don't, or they finish really fast except for one major or one single point. And in this situation, this dog was chasing the elusive single point. She was at 14, I think I'm assuming 14 points. I think she had her majors and she just needed a single point in order to finish. Couldn't get it. Kept being shown, kept being shown. But there was no written agreement that said when the dog resided with the guardian homeowners, when she resided with the breeder, other than the breeding scenario of whelping these puppies. And so the breeder started saying, well, I'm just going to keep her until the next show so that I can keep exercising her and make sure that, she's in good physical condition.
Yeah.
Oh, the last time you had her, she cut her toe in your backyard. So she can't have any physical blemishes in the breed ring. And it was like one thing after another. The breeder just started coming up with all these excuses on why she needed to keep possession of the dog in order to get this one point. But then the dog didn't get that point. And now it's been a year. And now it's, and time has gone by and everything else. And she wants to breed the dog, but she doesn't want to breed the dog until the dog finishes because she's not a champion yet. And so, meanwhile, the allure of junior handling and being involved and everything is starting to wane a little because this family has bonded with this dog and they want their family dog. The daughter wants the dog sleeping on her bed at night like she had been, and all of those things. And so it turned into a dispute, attorneys on both sides. Ultimately, there was a settlement agreement that the parties agreed. I don't recall specifically whether the dog ever finished, but the parties agreed in resolution for the breeding to occur. And then they delineated all the terms and conditions for when the dog would be with the breeder versus the guardian owners, and when they would go back and how the puppies were handled. And the big takeaway from this one is going back to the whole screening and finding the good fits for your guardian home participants, but then also the written contract theme. This was a scenario where a lot of these terms and conditions and these details and possession and when, who gets what, and all of that could have been detailed and memorialized in a contract on the front end and could have quite possibly avoided the entire lawsuit, the whole dispute, everything, because it would have said exactly when the breeder could have possession and when the guardian home could. And, it can define how long, if the dog doesn't finish by this point or whatever, you can set bumpers and guidelines on all of these different things when you have a written contract. And so ultimately these parties got their dog back, lost out on several years or a couple of years of time with their dog, which, as we all know, they're not here long enough to begin with, and essentially spent a bunch of money to memorialize terms to resolve a dispute that could have been memorialized before there was ever a dispute. So
yeah.
it was a mess. And the funny thing is sometimes I still see that breeder when I'm at dog shows.
Oh, geez.
When I was showing my dog, and I have a Rottweiler, and I finished his grand championship, and
Oh, good for you.
for whatever reason, our breeds just always seem to be showing close in time in nearby rings.
Oh gosh. Oh
But
yeah, that's gotta be
but
awkward.
I do try very hard to, I don't only represent breeders and I don't only represent owners. Everybody, there's usually sides that need to be advocated for and positions on both sides. But with that said, I still try to feel good when I look in the mirror that I'm advocating for good interests, that I'm advocating for the good guy, so to speak. And sometimes they're just two good guys having a dispute. But by doing that, I just have to keep in mind that I'm just doing my job. I was hired to do my job. Sometimes at horse shows and dog shows, I'm going to encounter people that I have engaged in legal disputes with.
Yeah, exactly. I know. That's the rough part, right? Yes. No, that's such good, such good information. I love how you describe it as bumpers too, which is like this is the plan, this is the path. But like in bowling, because I need bumpers in bowling, it's like let's not fall into the gutter. So we're gonna put all these guidelines here to keep us on the right path and to give us an idea. And I just feel like a contract is it sounds it sounds like you don't trust the person. Like a lot of people have that impression, like, oh, well, we need a contract if we can't trust each other. And it's like, no, you need a contract to think through all the things that could happen so that we can talk about them before they happen. And I'm with you.
Yes.
It has to be, this has to be thought about.
It's just about that meeting of the minds and getting everything on paper on the front end. And yeah, it's definitely a valuable exercise. It's just
Yeah.
about making sure that everybody's interests are accounted for in the agreement. And sometimes just the act of memorializing things, you realize you weren't actually on the same page. You both had separate understandings about something
Yeah.
that you thought you were on the same page about. And then by putting it into writing, yeah, I think that contracts are just a really good opportunity to make sure that everybody's on the same page. And that is sometimes brought to light just by putting things into writing. And the other nice thing about a contract is it's very to the point about, well, what happens if things don't work? I mean, this is a really good example of these people did have a tentative agreement that, oh, we're going to try to finish the dog. And if the dog finishes, we're going to breed the dog and we're going to do this. But certainly in an oral contract situation, you're not going to do this, but often written contracts don't either. What if the dog doesn't finish? Are we
Yeah.
going to set a limit on how long the dog can finish? Is it that the dog will only be bred if the dog finishes its championship, or is it based on the dog's age? Is it, like what is the
Right.
condition for making this dog a good breeding candidate? Or
Yeah.
and then what if the dog you can't get her to take? Or it's a stud dog, not as common in terms of guardianship homes, but it's a stud dog and his motility is low, or whatever else, and not even getting into the they grow up and they're not the candidate that we believe them to be scenario, which is a
That's a whole other can of worms. Yeah,
whole nother one
absolutely.
that we can talk about.
Yeah. No, I mean, that is interesting. I think, we have to evaluate. A lot of times, we have a hope for a dog and then they don't do what they're going to be, or like what happens? What happens if you give a dog, you have a guardian and the dog doesn't pass health testing? Now you got like two problems. One, you don't have that dog in your lines anymore. And two, now those people will have a dog that didn't pass health testing. So like now you might have warranty work on top of it. There's a lot of questions. They should have
Yeah.
the right to give the dog back. I think I always put a hard timeline on mine. Like usually like once the dog is like 4 or 5, depending on certain situations, it will be your dog and no matter what. And so, if she's coming into heat and she's not going to be done and in your home by the time she's this age, we're just not going to breed her. We're done. And that can happen. Or, or we finish out our 4 litters and we're done. And it doesn't
Yeah.
matter, that can happen at, 3.5 years old. Okay, good. We're done at 3.5. Anyhow, I think that's the sweet spot. I love having it be done because I like to tell people, look, this is only a 4-year agreement between us and then it's over. You
Mm-hmm.
can be done in 4 years. And so if they can just stick it out, I found that like even telling new puppy owners, like the first 8 weeks are terrible, but if you can stick through on a routine the first 8 weeks, you'll be great because they can do that. If I'm like, you'll forever have to be like this, they collapse. So just give
And
them.
then remember that again when they're almost a year old, or they're
Yes,
or
they have their
they're
nice little
around a year.
regression and you want to kill them. Yes, there's that moment too. I
And then
mean,
when they become juvenile delinquents before they are adults,
yes.
after they're done being a puppy, before they're an adult and they're juvenile delinquents.
Right, which lasts about 6 years for my breed. But yes, there you go. And so, I
But
think
yeah,
that it's so good. Can you think of anything else that breeders should consider, when going into or writing a contract, going into an agreement? Or maybe you could answer this. I find sometimes you share an agreement with people and they sort of like are like, why are we making this? Like they freak out. Like, why are we making this so formal? Why is this so detailed? They're like angry about the
yeah.
fact that you have a thorough contract that's addressing all of these things, even if it's written with both parties' best interests in mind.
I would say that for one, contracts, obviously, if I'm being hired to write a contract for a client, that's my client. And those are the interests that I have in mind. However, the contract is, I'm not trying to screw over the other side when I'm writing a contract either, because contracts are generally supposed to protect both parties.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that people should look at contracts as this scary thing that is one sided by the person presenting the contract, because it's an opportunity to memorialize what's important to both parties or all parties.
Yeah.
And so if either party is entering into a potential agreement with somebody, going back to that gut instinct thing, and you've got somebody who's super resistant, and you're the breeder, and you've got somebody who's really super resistant to your agreement. Why are there all these terms and conditions? This and that. Oh, your contracts. They start pushing back on all that stuff. I always tell people the writing is on the wall. That is your red flag. They just handed you a present to avoid
Yeah.
something that you probably don't want to deal with in the future, because I encounter that a lot with like equine lease disputes where somebody or equine leases. So somebody, and that's a transaction where, you're contracting to use somebody else's animal.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of risks for both parties, because one person's trusting their horse with somebody else and one person is taking care of a horse they don't own. And so there's a lot of really important interests to be accounted for in those agreements. Sometimes my lessors, when they come to me for an agreement to be drafted, the first lessee they present it to, it's like, I'm not signing that. I'm not, and they push back. So then initially the client is a little, sometimes, not always, sometimes they're right on the same page with me, but sometimes they're kind of like, whoa, I hired you to write this contract. And then the first person I present it to freaks out and walks away, and now I lost this lessee. And I have to kind of have that conversation with them, like, no, you didn't lose anything. You avoided a scenario, because this contract flushed them out and told you that this is not somebody that you want to do business with, because they didn't just come back and say, well, I'm uncomfortable with this, or what about this, and have a legitimate response to the agreement in a way that protects their interests while honoring yours. So if you've got somebody who takes a look at your agreement and wants to flip the table over, that's probably just your cue to exit stage left and not do business with that person.
I agree with you completely. I agree. And I think that also goes without saying that you need to make sure your contract reads well. And this is like after you've reviewed it and you're comfortable with the process, because you can't. I have seen a lot of contracts that are completely protecting the breeder and they don't do anything for the owner. And I think that just even in a puppy contract, like I see a lot of times, and maybe you can speak to this. It catches me off guard. I think it's kind of off. Basically, like there will be like a clause that at any point in time, if the breeder concludes that you're not taking care of the dog, that they can either force it to get a vet check or something like that. I mean, what is your take on those? It feels like a bit of an overreach.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, depending on the circumstances, you could argue it either way in terms of the breeder having the ability to go in and take back a pet versus this sort of unfettered discretion. And I can see scenarios on both sides, because if you are the breeder and you see one of your dogs into a home where it's truly being neglected, it's staying outside, it's a Doberman that doesn't have a double coat, and they have them living outside in a crate in December, and you're like, oh, this is ridiculous. Or the dog is malnourished, or whatever the case may be. There may be very legitimate scenarios where a breeder would want the ability to go back in and take that dog back. But that can also get abused, because if you're just, people are going to disagree. I always say in the horse or dog world, you want to know something, ask 10 people and you'll get 11 opinions, because
Right?
nobody can agree on anything. And so people are going to have pretty distinct opinions about the husbandry that goes behind their breeding dogs, and how they should be cared for in the home, whether they should or should not be on furniture, whether they should or should not be outside, whether they should or should not get human food, table scraps, whatever. I mean, everybody's going to have are they a family dog? Are they a pet? Are they a member of the family? Or are they a pet that belongs on the floor? I mean, everybody is going to have very distinct opinions about these things, and they're not necessarily wrong. And
Right.
so if the breeder is just saying, oh, you're doing it different, and I don't like how you're doing it because you're owning this dog differently than I would own it, then that's a problem. That's a problem that the breeder's trying to go in there and just because they disagree. I'm okay with that language if
there's some boundaries around it, like what would you put
yes,
around it?
and maybe it provides for a legal remedy that would have to be pursued through court That's
Mhm.
another way to do it where, because basically, if a contract doesn't provide the ability to retake an animal,
That's true. It is a
they're not
misunderstanding out
going,
there. You
yeah,
can't
they're
just say,
not.
here's my contract, and I can come to your house and it's like a search warrant and I can just walk in. Right.
Well, yeah, and depending on the language, I mean, maybe they don't have to go to court, but certainly without that language, they're not going to have a legal mechanism to try to undo the sale and take back the dog, most
Yeah.
likely, unless there's some basis to void the contract. But the contract is a completed contract. If you sold the dog, and you're unhappy with who you sold the dog to, too bad. If it truly is their dog, so the only way a breeder would have the ability to intervene would be if they retain some type of a repossessory right.
Mhm.
But that might just be a matter of giving them that legal mechanism that then has to be pursued in court. And then they go to
Right.
court and they say, this is what the contract says. It says that I'm allowed to retake possession of the dog and ownership reverts to me if they neglect X, Y, Z, all these
Mhm.
different terms and conditions. And then if those are met and the court agrees, then the court would give you the relief and entitle you
To go get the dog back. Yeah.
to get that dog back or allow a sheriff to intervene and get the dog if they won't cooperate.
I think
So,
in
yeah,
fairness, you brought this up before. Finding the right people is always better. Fix it on the front end. Set the expectations in the contract, but do it on the front end. I also have a joke with breeders. I say if it's in your contract, the first time they read it, it shouldn't be in your contract. It should be on your website. Let's like have this discussion before we're already invested in a puppy and all these things, like it just, I have a health guarantee. They can't spay neuter. That's on my website. Crazy. Can't spay neuter till they're a year old. Okay. That's part of the requirement. I don't know. It just seems to be the more transparency is better. And then people who would not agree can leave without contacting you and wasting your time. I also feel too, a lot of times breeders use a lot of kind of scary language that sort of ruins the rapport with their people. And then all of a sudden, the buyers are like, or the owners are afraid to call you when they have a problem because they're going to assume that you're going to call it neglect or you're going to call it this. And then if that's in your clause, like, I don't want to risk, I'm not going to call her because then she might think I'm not taking care of my dog and try to, so I don't want to create that dynamic either. I always feel like my people, they don't work it out. And German short hairs are hard. They just bring them back. Just bring them back. I'm not going to ask any questions. Just bring the dog back.
your website point, it reminds me of the tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them again.
Yeah.
Um, it's kind of
Sounds
that
better
same
when you say
concept,
it.
but it is about transparency, and it's not about hiding anything. It's about putting it all on the table in the
Yeah.
beginning and then continuing. The tell them again part would be the ongoing communications that you have with that party while you're engaged. I mean, if it's just a sale, maybe things end. If it's a guardian home scenario, then that's an ongoing relationship. But even with the first scenario, most breeders have a right of first refusal. If you want your buyers to remember that they signed a right of first refusal, but you haven't talked to them in 6 years, if something
Right.
happens and they need to move or whatever, they're probably not going to think about you and reach out and see about returning the dog to you. So,
Yeah.
and then you don't know where the dog ends up. So, I think that there's something to be said about the relationships, that side of this, and
Yeah.
maintaining them long term. And those people result in referrals and send you new puppy buyers too.
Yeah, they really do. I think so. It's just a great opportunity to use the email newsletter to just say sort
Yeah.
of in their brain. And as long as your email newsletter isn't like, we have puppies, it's like something a little bit more useful to previous owners,
Yeah.
then they can be like, oh, that's what's going on over there. And they stay aware and you're very easy to reach at that point.
Yeah. And you can, oh, did you know that you can feed your dogs pumpkin?
Right. There you go. Something simple, right? Yeah, and the
You
weather's
can,
changing. Here's what we should think about.
yeah.
Like
Because
here's
the
what's
German
going
short
on.
hairs don't have any kind of double coat or anything. So
No,
you
you want
probably have to,
Oh yeah, I'll tell you a quick funny story. I had a lady, she's so cute. She had had one of my dogs for like 7 years. She ended up moving to Maine. And so she's texting me, I hadn't heard from her years. She sends me this picture of her dog's back. Like all you can see is the picture is fur. And it was a little wavy, which is kind of unique. And she goes, I'm just so worried. We just, his coat, since we've been here, it just got all wavy and everything. And I'm like, so he grew a thicker coat because he moved to Maine. And that was the whole thing. She was so worried he had some weird disease that was making his hair grow funny. And like, it was the equivalent of a German short. We don't do undercoats. So it was, they just get thicker. And my dogs do, the ones that are outside all the time, they get a little thicker in the winter, even in Arizona. But yeah, it was just cracking me
Oh, they
up.
get a little coat.
Yeah, it's cute, but it did get long and it did get a little wavy. And she just thought it
That's
was so
funny.
nice. Yeah, it was good. But I think that's why we want to be there all the time for those little things. Be available.
For sure. We were talking about the unilateral decision making there, the abusive
Oh,
decision making
yes.
of breeders
Yeah.
made me think of another example or
Oh,
another
please. Hmm.
scenario because this one is a good example of the fact that we don't always know what a dog is going to grow up to be. They might be the pick of the litter and then they grow up and you don't even want to breed them, or the runt or the one that you never even really looked at turns out to be the nicest dog in the litter
Yeah.
when they grow up. And so, we can obviously do our best and sometimes
Yeah.
we're right, but there's no crystal ball. And I had a scenario with a gal who I, again, represented the buyer. And just these are all buyer examples, or at least where I was involved on behalf of the buyer. So I guess it's just worth mentioning that I represent a lot of breeders, but I represent the breeders. I help them draft contracts a lot.
And then they don't have to come back to you. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I do seem to work with the dispute side with the buyers more than I do the breeder, but I'm sure it's been on both sides. I'm just recent ones aren't popping to
I
mind.
think it,
Anyway,
yeah, well, that's
um,
good. Go
I
ahead.
removed the bumpers and I'm into the bowling gutters right now. Um, but this was a scenario with the buyer who was purchasing this dog with the intent of doing performance sports. She didn't have
Hmm.
any interest in breeding the dog or anything like that. Her whole goal was to do a whole bunch of performance sports and do stuff with this dog. The breeder wanted to breed the dog. And there was a written contract. This is a scenario where there was a written contract. And it was a very, very detailed contract about when the dog would be spayed and about the breeding. And it was a male. So there was very specific information about collection. And then the contract terms had a lot of language that favored the breeder in terms of selecting females, selecting, breeding timing, the decision to breed. Like there wasn't even mutuality language. Like the parties will agree or whatever.
There was no, the parties will agree. It was just like the breeder will do this.
Yes. Yeah. And I
Yeah,
actually have the contract pulled up. Yeah, it was just extremely one-sided.
sure.
And if I took the time to skim this, I could probably extract some very specific language as an example. But the point being that the breeder basically had a lot of decision making in terms of the breeding and all of these different things. But the contract did not address the scenario of buyer, owner disagreeing with breeder's decisions or the dog not being a suitable breeding candidate for one reason or another, or the buyer not believing the dog was a suitable breeding candidate, or as it related or as it worked out in this case, the dog was an intact male, and as realized he was an intact male and became an adult, a mature adult, it affected his temperament. He didn't have a great temperament as an intact male. And it was the type of temperament that, as a breeder who's really trying to better the breed, is probably going to decline as a breeding candidate for that temperament. And that temperament issue actually began interfering with her ability to do the performance events because the dog was so focused on his hormones and everything else that he wasn't focused on her and
Yeah.
working. He was more focused on these new hormones and these feelings and these things that he
Well, and
just
if there's a female in heat or coming out of heat,
has.
all kinds of, they can be so distracted.
So
Absolutely.
now, yeah, he was completely distracted and she couldn't perform. She couldn't do the thing that she had purchased this dog to do. And she wanted to spay the dog. The dog
Yeah.
also was
She wanted to
passing.
be,
It was like,
yeah.
okay, it was like normal and good or something like that. He had like mediocre OFA results as
Okay.
well. And so, and he had allergies. He had significant allergies and had to live on medication. So she's like, okay, he has to live on medication for his allergies. He's
Yeah.
his temperament is an issue.
Yeah.
It's interfering with the performance. And then when they tried to collect from him, there were motility concerns. I mean, it was just like the writing was on the wall, and the breeder was still like, I'm entitled to collect his semen. I get to freeze.
Yeah.
There were specifics on what she could collect and everything else. So then my client was like, okay, well, he's not a good breeding candidate. You won't cooperate. You won't do anything here. The purpose of me buying this dog is not now being met because of him being intact.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to neuter him. And
Hmm.
then we were looking at, well,
What will be the
what are the
consequences of you
breach
neuter?
consequences?
Yeah.
Because
Another one.
the contract doesn't let her out. The contract obligates her to let this dog be bred. And so
Yeah.
how do you resolve a dispute when the only reasonable resolution is not aligned with what the contract says? And so
Yeah.
sometimes you can resolve those things with that person, but I always say that it's difficult to reason with an unreasonable person.
There's
So
that.
had to pause after I said that one. And so here we are trying to reason with an unreasonable person, and we're
Yeah.
not getting anywhere. And so we had to reach a point where we just said, okay, well, she took at the dog shows and stuff, there will be those mobile collection entities that go to the shows or
Yeah.
whatever,
Like,
and
mhm.
they'll collect and freeze for you and stuff like that. She utilized one of those. They were coming into the area. So she got the stuff collected so that she couldn't say that here's the semen. Here I collected
Yeah.
from them. Here it is. You want it, you can take it. She scheduled the spay or the neuter. She got him
Hmm.
neutered. And it was like okay, well, we're just going to walk away. And then she walked away without any assurance that this lady wasn't going to come back and sue her.
Sure.
And so we had to mitigate her exit strategy, her risk in her exit strategy as much as
Yeah.
we could, mitigate the damages that she could potentially be responsible for this
Yeah.
other party for as much as we could. And thankfully, and I feel like I can say this now because I think this was from 23 or 4, this is an older matter, nothing came of it. And then flash forward last year, I think it was, the client purchased another dog and was going to enter into an arrangement where that dog would be bred. And she came to me and she said, okay, I need you to help me with the contract.
Right.
So I helped her draft a contract for that arrangement. She was like,
Right.
this is a really good person. We're truly on the same page and everything else. She's like, but after everything I went through before.
100%. Right. 100%.
But
So,
on that last scenario, I mean, she never got an AKC registration transfer. It was in both of their names and everything because
yeah.
she had to just agree to walk away. There was no formal resolution, there was no court order or anything like that. So she was able to continue showing the dog. She had the dog in her name in terms
Yeah.
of performance events, but some issues were never resolved. She just had to
The risk kind of, yeah, that it could turn
accept
into
it and move
something
on.
later. I agree with you. I feel like every guardian contract needs a buyout, and with studs, you can always make the buyout cover the collection and the storage for X amount of years and have that paid up front. And that's part of the buyout. And that way you can always be covered. And then you can have a higher consequence for not doing the collection. There can always be those. To me, that seems like such a simple way to handle it. Make it easy for them to do the thing you want them to do.
Yeah, and
And
if you want somebody to follow through on something, make it clear in the contract and
yeah,
use plain language as much as you can, going to your make it easy to read point.
yes. Try to make it like, yes, it shouldn't be too crazy. Like, I don't know. And like for me, I used to do, I didn't get up as early as I do now. And I used to get up kind of late and people, and so I used to do boarding by the day when people would drop off a dog for boarding, if I was breeding previous dogs or that I bred. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is a nightmare because people were like, well, I need to get in like before 9 o'clock so I don't get charged for that day. And I'm like, I don't want to deal with you before 9 o'clock. And so I flipped it and I just started charging by night because like, I'm not going to have you come to my house before 7 a.m., So
Yes.
that's a night. If they drop the dog off at 6 p.m., I got that night's payment. But either way, it just made it so much simpler because the night was always easy to count and people weren't like trying to like jump through hoops to get it just in time to not pay you for the extra day.
And I get it. We all do the same to try to avoid
Oh,
the
completely.
extra
Yeah.
payment. But yeah, you got to structure things in a way that works for you as well.
Yeah, it just made it so much simpler. And then I found it was so much easier. And then if I had to push them back because I literally legitimately couldn't meet them, they didn't feel like I was taking advantage of them either.
Lots of really good food for thought. And
Tons of stuff. Yeah, you have so much stuff you've shared with us today that's so helpful. So many good things to think about. I really wish, and breeders hate when I say this, I'm really sorry, guys, but I really don't think you should be like using guardian homes until you've had like quite like a good handful of litters. You just need to know more about your dogs, how they cycle, what that looks like, so you can support your guardians. Otherwise, it just comes across kind of wonky.
guardian homes should not be used to grow your breeding program.
Okay, give me more.
It should not be the catalyst to developing your reputation and growing the numbers and everything else.
I
If
see
you
what you're
need to
saying.
grow by putting dogs into a guardian home, then you're probably not focusing on what matters most. I mean, that's not lawyer advice. That's just me growing up in these industries and being around
Yeah.
it and stuff like that. I mean, if you're really truly breeding because you're trying to, yes, people are making money off of this. And if you're doing it full time, you're trying to make a living, and that's perfectly appropriate. But at the same time, it's an animal. You know, we have that animal in mind. We're trying
Mhm.
to better the breed, the standard, whatever. There or a temperament based thing for service related work, whatever. There is something that we're trying to achieve from that breeding program, and bigger isn't always better.
I agree with you. I think where it works really well is if you have, I feel like your core program should be under your roof. And for most breeders, a core program is not huge, right? You're looking at maybe 4 to 8 dogs.
Mm-hmm.
Most people can have 4 to 8 dogs where they live. I understand some people have their HOAs and stuff and they have different problems. I'd probably look at moving. But so you can build a really nice program. You can make very reasonable income with 4 to 6 dogs. And then I think we start dabbling in guardians if we want to try out a different bloodline, or if we want to retain a bloodline, but we can't use it yet, or
Yeah.
we just want to keep it in reserve as a backup, like, so we're kind of placing them, to me, they're like borderline, or if demand went up and we had a lot of dogs on our litter, or we have a backup in case a mom missed. To me, it's like built-in
Yes.
buffer. I like that.
Yeah.
I'm not opposed to it because I know a lot of breeders are very successful, but they have very, very good relationships with their guardians.
Yes.
And those people are taking really good care of their dog, but the ones that are the best are really interested, like you said, in the
Mm-hmm.
outcome of the breeding program. They're excited to be a guardian because their dog gets to be part of a breeding program. They don't really want to like raise puppies or anything. They just want to have their dog be part of that. They kind
Yes.
of feel honored to be in that situation, and they seem to be the best ones. Yeah. And
And the
then,
ones that
yeah,
don't just love the idea of that and truly appreciate it
yeah.
in a way that they can live with it as the arrangement is ongoing.
Yes,
And
I agree with you. I agree with you.
so,
And then it ends, and then, a lot of times those guardians, when it ends, they're interested in a second one, which is awesome. Those are like your best fits. And I will say, like, some breeders are afraid to have a stud. I don't know what happened in the world, but we got really afraid of intact males. I don't know. Like, people are like, well, can you have an intact? I'm like, yes, you can have an intact male. Well, can you have two? I have like 9. Yes, you can have them. Okay, I don't have 9 anymore. I used to. Um, but you can, yes, they're great. They're normal dogs. They're just fine.
it
My
depends
stud
on the
dog
dog.
sleeps. Yeah, it's just a dog, right? And my stud dog sleeps with my son every night, like no big deal. But they come with their own set of things. Sometimes they get on their marking, routine and you want to use belly bands. So I feel like if you're like, I'm afraid of stud dogs, I need to place my stud dog in a guardian home. How are you going to support your guardian home when they have stud problems? Or any issues or anything, because you need to know your dogs first. And I do hesitate because I think a lot of breeders don't know their dogs well enough when they're in guardian
Yeah.
homes. And so you have to figure out. And so I love the breeders who find guardians who travel a lot and do free boarding. That is a beautiful opportunity to get to know your guardian.
I think anything can be abused. And so, my comment about using the guardian homes to grow your breeding program is sort of is more to the point of doing it for the wrong reasons.
You're just
And
saying to capitalize on more. I don't have to take care of these dogs. I don't have to feed them, and I can just leverage them for their reproductive means. And like, yes,
yes,
absolutely,
yes,
that is not the place to be. That would not be the
breeding.
honest dog breeder plan. No.
No, no, no. talk about all the details, put them into writing, talk about what happens when things don't go the way that you intend. I don't think either party should ever have exclusive decision-making authority on most things. I mean, I
Yeah.
guess there's exceptions to every rule, but for the most part, no one should have unilateral decision-making authority.
Yeah. Well, you have a great point on the buyers having, it's interesting because in my opinion, like my first gut reaction was, how could I ever trust a buyer to tell me what I can and can't do for my breeding program? Like they don't have the background to make that assessment, but they're living with them, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, I do feel like I'd want final decision making on that.
Yeah.
But you're right that they don't have an avenue to balance that. But I guess they could buy out if they want it to be done, or I could collect and make a terrible breeding decision, which isn't on them, right?
I think for certain things, I think for both parties having a say, there's probably a little bit of a distinction between a guardianship arrangement and a co-ownership arrangement.
Agreed.
Because the last scenario that I was talking about, where the breeding scenario went off the rails, was a co-ownership where the two parties
Oh, that's
co-own.
true. And I
Yeah,
will
they
say my,
co-own the dog. So in a
yeah,
guardianship situation, you're defining the owner and all of those dynamics, but it's a little bit different than I think
I,
where a co-owner is
yeah,
should truly have a little bit more of a say in the breeding. I agree that,
yeah,
a random guardian home is not necessarily going to have anything
right.
to
Yeah,
say about your lines.
I define the difference between co-own and guardian is that they have an interest in the offspring.
Yeah, that's a good
So
way to.
co-own is, invested in the offspring, whereas the guardian doesn't really, it's not that they don't care about the puppies, but they're not like invested in how well the puppies turn out and will they be good breeding dog. Like that's not really of interest to a guardian home. They're more just excited their dog is a part of that process.
Yeah,
But yeah, the guardians or the co-owns really they'll want to get the titles. They'll want to see that the offspring do well because they're part of that flow. They're kind of a part of the bloodline. Yeah. So I
and
agree.
likely in
That's a
the
good point.
industry,
Yeah.
and likely in the
Yes.
industry to some extent.
Yeah. Yeah. They're probably doing something. And I know a lot of breeders, like with doodles, like we don't, there's no shows, right? There's no shows. There's not really doing events. And so you do see a lot more guardians in those. And the
Yeah,
co-owns I see in doodles tend to be co-owning studs, right? So that they
okay.
can share the genetics. I see that frequently. And again, they're both very vested in that. But that's a whole other can of worms, sharing a breeding dog. Um,
Yes.
we didn't even go into that one. We'll say that for another day.
Yeah, it just made me think
Uh,
of a whole nother scenario, but good grief, that one's not even, yes, sharing breeding dogs is hard.
it's hard. I think sometimes the stud stuff can work really well. Well, can you tell us where people can find you? This has just been
Yeah,
wonderful.
absolutely. I have a website. It's my firm name, Jessica E. Johnson, PLLC.com. And then I'm also on Facebook with my firm name, Jessica E. Johnson, PLLC, DBA, The Equine Esquire. And I'm most active on my Facebook page. And then I also have an Instagram, which is The Equine Esquire. So
Mhm.
that's where you can find me. And
Sure. And to clarify, you are only in Washington, correct?
yeah, so
How does that work?
licensure as an attorney is limited to state by state. And so I'm only licensed in Washington state. I can only give legal advice to people who are in Washington state. But if there was a transaction that involved Washington, like a
Mhm.
dog was purchased from or went to Washington or something like that, where Washington is involved in the transaction, then I might be able to assist. But
Sure.
yeah, I'm only licensed up
Yeah.
here. So some of the
Yeah.
things that we talked about, I mean, contracts are a little bit different and they're not as state specific as other subjects that we could talk about. But some of the things that we talked about might depend on the state where people are in, what state they're in and what the case law and state laws say.
Yeah, no, it's perfect. Well, thank you so much for explaining that. If you guys want more inside the Honest Dog Breeder Society, Jessica put together a wonderful masterclass on contract clauses that are often frequently missed or not really understood very well. So oof, that was money in the bank on that one. But anyway, but thank you so much for coming on the show, and I hope we can have you back sometime.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you for having me, Julie. It's been great to meet you earlier this year. And
That was fun.
so I've enjoyed our conversations. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, Ghana Speakers Unite. All right. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. You take care.